Hello, Writing 350. Let's talk through resumes today. This is the second part of chapter 11 in your book, and we're going to kind of just go through, do some tips about resumes, and just some kind of general best practices. So, first thing is the length of a resume. I'm going to operate under the assumption that most of you are familiar with what a resume is as a document. I'm assuming that most of you have already created one for other courses or for jobs or things like that. So I'm trying to just kind of build on your existing knowledge here. So to begin with, we really want to make sure our resume is under a page. At this stage in your career, it's not usually a huge issue. It does happen sometimes where people will go onto a second page. You really want to make sure that you're staying on one. That said, you don't want it to be a half. You want to try to fill that page, right? The best that you can and not leave a ton of empty white space around the edges. So a full page is ideal. So if you're like, I don't have enough content to fill it up, time to start thinking about how you can do that. So your three main emphases in resume creation are what is relevant, what is superior, and what is recent. Hint, you'll see this on your final exam, right? So take a note of that. So you want to include only information that's relevant to the job that you're applying to. So if you're applying to a job as a cook, right, it probably isn't of a ton of value to them about your accounting experience, right? And you can include it if that's kind of the only other thing that you have. And vice versa. If you're applying for a job as an accountant, they might not need to know about your time as a cook, right? What's relevant? What is superior, right? What are the things that are going to make you look superior to the other people who are applying for the job, that are going to make you look your best? And what is recent, right? If you're applying for an accounting job, but your last experience in accounting was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, which can, for you guys, is probably not totally relevant. But there may be things that happened in high school. People sometimes include that, which isn't really relevant or recent, right, for you guys at the stage that you're at. So think about what has happened now, right? Not the volunteer thing you did your sophomore year of high school. So we want to include the details, right, of the situations, including like jobs and internship duties, getting specific. So these are examples of bad, non-specific ones. So these were maybe the things that you might do in a job, right? I train new employees, I helped set up events, I wrote articles. Each of these is going to have several follow-up questions, right? How many employees did you train? What did you train them to do? When did you do it, right? Can I include any of that information, right? Train 25 new employees on a POS cash register system. Okay, now I have a sense of that, right? Helps with events, same thing. What were the events? What did you do? Setup is kind of generic, etc. So you can see here that we're starting with verbs, and we're starting with verbs that are happening in the past tense. If it's a job that you had in the past, keep it there. But you want to kind of start with verbs. So your writing style should be concise. We're kind of trying to keep these quick, easy to scan, easy to read. Like I said, verb driven. Make sure you're paying attention to the tense. Avoid nominalizations, which essentially means that you're turning verbs into nouns, right? So these are my examples: development versus develop, admiration versus admire. You shouldn't say I or me, refer to self in this. You kind of want to keep the subject out of it. You can use the AdWords from a specific job or their phrases to kind of help get you through any of that scanning software that's looking for those keywords. If you have a summary section of your resume, that's especially helpful to include it there. Your layout and design should be something that's easy to read. Some people are better designers than others, or they, have more experience in that, things of that nature. So some people like to use templates, and I would say that's okay to a point, right? But you just don't want to use the first Microsoft Word template that comes open for you, because, of course, many people are using that, and it's pretty generic. If you're going to pick a template, I would pick one that's just very basic and simple, and cut out any unnecessary color. But the whole point of a resume is that a person can have it on their, in front of them on their computer, in front of them, reading it, and they can easily scan. Okay, I see this is Jeff. He did this. This was the dates. This is what it was. Cool. I get a sense of you right away. It has bullet points. Doesn't have big, long paragraphs of text. 2 fonts max, right? Not a ton of fonts, not a ton of color, because, of course, sometimes people print them. The color doesn't always come out. that they're balanced, right? So one side isn't all text and the other side is completely plain, or the bottom has nothing. There's too much white space, meaning like there's just empty white. So you can kind of see like in this corner here, right? Anything that doesn't have that balance, where there's just white space living. So you don't want that. That's a common mistake as well. So there's two types of resumes defined in your book: a chronological and skills resume. A skills resume is usually for people who are like changing careers or who are just starting out. Most of you will be using the chronological style, which is the one that you may be more familiar with. So these are the things that you typically include in your resume, and we're going to briefly go over each of these. So starting with your name and contact information, right? You want to include your full name. You don't have to put your middle name. You can put an initial if you feel fancy like that. You can use a large type for your name. Usually people will put theirs in the header section, and they'll put it in like the same size font as the rest. You can make it larger, right, to kind of make it stand out. Include one address unless you live at school and you have a different home address. Your phone number if you have a professional or relevant website, and your email address, making sure you're using a professional email, not like, hot cheeks at Yahoo or something. You can use your school one, a Gmail with your name, something simple, anything of that nature. So some people love their objective in their resume. This is a hill they like to die on. You can't take away my objective. I will not mark you down for having one. It's your life. You do what you want to do. I think that this has become somewhat of an old convention and people don't use as much. And the reason is twofold. First of all, they're kind of redundant, right? They're usually like, I want to get a job in the tech industry. Okay, well, that's supposed to be made clear by you applying for the job, right? Additionally, they're usually focused on the self, not focused on the employer, right? Like, I want a job in tech so that I can grow my skills and, become a better developer. Well, okay, that doesn't really have anything to do with them, right? So it can be addressed in the cover letter usually. I just don't think they're really useful. So if you want to keep yours, or you think mine is not like that, mine is well written and purposeful, cool. Prove me wrong. I'd love to see a good one. Usually they're not. So some people also include this, a summary of qualification or skills section before they get into their education and experience. It's not required, but if you want to kind of list a summary of your overall skills or kind of your situation, that can work. The only thing I would not suggest is just listing a bunch of soft skills here, like hard worker, team player, good communications, like things that aren't able to be empirically proven. Anyone can say anything about themselves, right? So I would focus on that stuff more in your cover letter or in your interview than in your resume, unless it's specifically listed in that job, right? But I wouldn't lean too hard on just the soft skills. Your education usually will show up before your experience. And this goes in reverse chronology, meaning whatever is the most recent will show up first. So for most of you guys, that'll be, okay, Grand Valley. And you can list your expected graduation date, right? You don't have to list dates attended. So maybe you have an idea, right? Okay, well, I'm going to graduate in spring of 2020 or whatever. You can list that expected spring 2020. If you went to a community college, you really don't need to list that unless you graduated, because of course those credits you just brought to Grand Valley. So if you do have an associate's degree, you can include that, or obviously if you have another degree from another school. You don't really have to put your high school. Again, by the mere fact that you're in college, it's pretty much implied that you have a high school diploma or a GED. If you have other professional certifications, you can list those, or you can list them under your experience. If you want to abbreviate, for example, you want to list the degree type that you're obtaining. So you might say, I'm getting a BA in English. You can use periods or not, just be consistent. GPA is something that usually kind of goes field to field, whether or not you want to list that. You typically will know whether it's something that is valued in your field or not. I would say those of us in the humanities world, it's usually less important. People who are like in tech and business, they tend to want your GPAs on there, but that's not really a hard and fast rule. That just tends to be the trend. So you choose if you want to put your GPA on there. I wouldn't if it's lower than a 3-point probably. And if you list your major GPA versus your overall GPA, you need to be clear about that that's what you're listing. So maybe you have a 3.8 in your major and you have a 3.1 overall. You can't just say you have a 3.8 GPA. It's not really ethical. So make sure you define that if you include that. Honors and awards. Sometimes you can make your own section if you're cool like that and you have so many to list. So you might have things like scholarships, fellowships, awards, any of these kind of things that are relevant, right? So remember the relevant component. So sometimes people will be like, my, high school went to state, for whatever band, but it's not really relevant to the job. So make sure that you are, including that only if it matters. If you don't have 3 or more to make its own list, you can list it under, the thing where it happened. So if it's a college thing, you could list it under the education component or whatever. But it doesn't have to be its own section. Experience, you want to think about, okay, you're putting these in reverse chronological order, meaning your current job should be first and then the one that you had before that and so on. People like to put the one that makes them look the coolest first, but that's technically not correct. So if you had an internship a year ago, that was great. But now you work at Taco Bell and you're like, Taco Bell doesn't make me look as cool. You still got to put Taco Bell first if you work there now. Not that there's anything wrong with working at Taco Bell. Okay, hear me now. No problem. This is about your perception, right? Point is, you need to make sure you're going in reverse chronological order and putting all of those detailed information. So the dates, your job title, the company, where you worked, what you were doing. If you had multiple jobs in the same company, for example, you worked at Taco Bell, you started out as a crew member and then you were promoted and then you became a shift leader and then you became the general manager, right? You can list all of that under Taco Bell and list the dates of those specific jobs. That's fine. Make sure you're backing up the duties. So can you use numbers? Can you get more detailed? And try not to use the same verbs over and over in your explanation, right? So if you're stuck, there's a list in chapter 11 that will help you kind of try to come up with different verbs to use. If you have other skills that you might want to include, if you speak a foreign language, if you have different programming languages, any other types of skills. This list is not exhaustive. There's many other types of skills that you may have. Think about where you might want to include those. If you want to include activities as its own section, you can do that as well, or volunteering. If you volunteered regularly, like at least once a week, then you could put that under your employment and just list your job as a volunteer. That's fine. If you're part of an organized student society, or you were in a professional association, which if you're not, I would recommend doing. Look up the one for your discipline. There's many, and they're really cheap to join if you're a student. It's just something you can put on your resume, and they'll send you their newsletter or whatever. If you're in a social club, I wouldn't include it again unless it's relevant or it shows something else. So maybe you were the president of the anime club. Well, that's going to show a little bit more than just being like an enthusiast or whatever. Things like that kind of show something that the job might be interested in. I'll go back a beat there. Sometimes people actually list just their hobbies on their resume. I'd say that's a medium controversial choice. It kind of humanizes the person, right? They're like, I like mountain biking and I like to do yoga or whatever. That's a personal choice if you feel compelled to do that. It's a conversation starter. But again, it may not be totally relevant. It could rub the person the wrong way, especially if it's something they're like, I hate mountain biking. I mean, whatever. So you decide. I'm not going to say that that's right or wrong to do that. It's somewhat risky. If you have a portfolio that fits within your discipline, you can include a link to that. So for you guys who are in computer science, maybe it's like your GitHub link, or for you guys who are in ad PR, you might have an online portfolio of work or different or art or whatever you're up to. You can include a link to that, or your LinkedIn if you wish to do that. You don't have to list your references on your resume. So just make sure you have some. You don't have to also list references available upon request, because of course there always are, right? If they ask you, you'll give it to them. But make sure you know who you're going to ask. Be prepared. Make sure they know. I get this all the time from students ask me, or people will call me and be like, do you remember this student? And it could be so long ago, I don't totally remember their situation, and then it's awkward because I feel like it doesn't put them in the best light. So make sure that you are choosy about who you pick and that they know. You'll see a link here if you look at the slides version of this, what not to include in a resume. It's pretty funny, actually. I won't take you through it, but if you want to look at it on the slides, it'll give you some good examples of really horrible resumes, things that you shouldn't put on there, that hopefully are, straightforward, but who knows. But in general, you don't want to include anything that's going to cast you in a negative light, or that could be detrimental to them legally. So, of course, they don't really want to know some of that stuff if you have children, or how old you are, your race, or your marital status, or if you have a health issue or something like that. That could become legally dicey for a company to be dealing with, and it's not really relevant to your job performance. So you can just leave that off. Anything that's incriminating, of course, you would want to leave off. And then lastly, this is my don't lie about stuff slide, based the ethics, honesty. It's not good to lie on your resume or to fluff your resume. A lot of times employers can find out a lot about a lot of things. In the internet age, there's not a ton of secrets. So if you're like, no, I have no felonies or misdemeanors, right? They can run that legal check. Some will run credit checks on you as well. Your employment history. So if you said you worked at a place for a certain amount of time, but you didn't, or your academic credentials, things like that. Obviously, you don't want to lie about your GPA. The things you did in your job, you don't want to make your previous job seem more important. If you lie about technical abilities, of course, that could come back to bite you, or your language proficiency or anything like that. So in general, you just want to be honest and ethical in creating resumes and job searching in general, because it's, it ultimately will hurt you as you go forward. So there's a couple more slides here. I won't go over them, but you're welcome to look at them. They're kind of just helpful hints if you're going through career changes or things like that. So that's sort of my resume speech for the day. Hopefully that will be helpful to you as you go forward, and I look forward to seeing your work. So good luck.